The city hospital stood tall and quiet under a cold morning sky. Inside the building the lights were bright, but the halls still felt sleepy. Nurses walked fast with clipboards and warm coffee and careful faces. The air smelled like clean sheets and soap and something sharp that reminded people to stay calm. Behind one door on the third floor, a small room waited with soft machine sounds and slow, steady beeps. In that room, a 9-year-old girl named Lena lay on a bed with white rails and a thin blanket. Her dark hair rested on the pillow like spilled ink and her cheeks looked pale but peaceful. She had been asleep for many weeks and no one could say when she would open her eyes. Her mother Sarah sat beside her every day and rarely left for long. Sarah held Lena's hand and rubbed her fingers gently as if warmth could travel through skin and reach the place where Lena was lost. Sarah spoke in simple stories about school and neighbors and the small plants at home. Sarah described the smell of fresh bread from the corner shop and the sound of rain on the window at night. Sarah believed Lena could hear something even if Lena could not answer. The doctors tried to be kind and careful when they spoke. They said Lena's body was strong and her breathing was steady and her heart was steady. They also said Lena's mind was quiet and resting in a deep place. They promised they would keep helping and watching and waiting. Sarah nodded every time, but the heavy fear stayed inside her chest like a stone. That same morning the hospital entrance became the start of something no one could explain. A large German shepherd appeared near the sliding glass doors as if he had walked straight out of the fog. His fur was thick and clean and his posture was straight like a trained guard. His eyes were dark and focused and not the eyes of a lost animal. He did not pace in panic and he did not whine for food. He stood still and watched the building as if he was studying it. A security guard noticed him and tightened his jaw. The guard stepped outside and waved his hands to push the dog away. The dog moved back a step but did not run. He only turned his head and looked through the glass doors again. The guard thought the dog might belong to someone nearby and decided to watch for a moment. A nurse came out pushing a cart and the doors opened with a soft slide. In one smooth motion the German shepherd slipped inside. He moved fast but not wild and his paws made little sound on the clean floor. A clerk gasped and called for security. 2 nurses looked up and froze because they had never seen a dog move like that in a hospital. The guard rushed in after him and shouted for someone to stop the animal. People pointed and stepped aside and tried not to panic. The German shepherd did not bark and did not snap and did not show anger. He ran down the hall as if he already knew where he was going. He turned left at the desk and right near the elevators. He moved past the waiting area without looking at the chairs or the vending machines. He slowed only when he reached the 3rd floor hallway. His ears lifted and his pace became steady and careful. He walked past several doors and stopped in front of room 317. He stood close to the door and sniffed the air once as if confirming a scent he had carried for a long time. Inside the room Sarah was speaking softly to Lena about a silly story from Lena's class. Sarah was smiling, but her smile was thin and tired. She heard quick steps in the hall and turned her head. The door opened and the German shepherd stepped in. Sarah's whole body went still like a held breath. Her first instinct was fear because hospitals did not allow animals and she did not know what this dog wanted. The dog looked at her for one short moment and then looked at Lena. His gaze settled on the bed like it belonged there. Sarah saw something in his eyes that felt strange and gentle at the same time. The dog took 2 careful steps forward and sat beside the bed. He lowered his head and made a soft sound from deep in his chest like a quiet sigh. Sarah felt tears rise without permission because the scene felt too meaningful to be random. The machines continued their gentle rhythm, but the room felt different now. Security arrived at the door and 2 staff members followed close behind. The guard spoke loudly and said the dog had to be removed at once. A nurse reached for the dog's collar but found no collar at all. A doctor stepped in and asked Sarah if the dog belonged to her. Sarah shook her head and could not find words. The dog stayed calm and did not move away. He leaned his head closer to Lena's hand as if listening. Sarah noticed Lena's fingers twitch once under the blanket. Sarah leaned forward so fast her chair scraped softly. Sarah stared at Lena's hand and then looked at the doctor. The doctor moved closer and watched the monitors. The beeping did not stop, but it changed slightly, as if Lena's body had answered a small call. The staff grew quiet because everyone had heard the change. The dog placed one paw gently on the edge of the bed rail and stayed still. Sarah whispered Lena's name again and again with a shaky voice. Lena's eyelids fluttered for the briefest moment, and then rested closed. Sarah put a hand to her mouth because she was afraid to breathe too hard. The doctor raised a hand to slow the room and asked everyone to stay calm. The doctor checked Lena's pulse and looked at the screen again. The numbers remained steady, but the pattern showed a small shift that did not match the usual long quiet weeks. The nurse looked at the dog as if the dog had flipped a hidden switch. The doctor asked security to step back and give space. The guard hesitated but listened because the dog was not causing harm. Sarah felt her fear turning into a strange hope she had not felt in a long time. The dog kept his eyes on Lena like he was guarding a treasure. Sarah noticed his fur was slightly damp near the neck, as if he had traveled through mist or light rain. She also noticed a faint mark near his shoulder where the fur looked pressed down like an old scar hidden under hair. The dog's breathing was slow and controlled like a trained helper. A nurse brought a towel and offered it to Sarah, but Sarah did not take her eyes off Lena. Sarah spoke softly about home and the sun and the garden pot Lena had painted. The dog lifted his head when Sarah spoke and then lowered it again toward Lena's hand. Lena's fingers moved a second time, and this time the movement was clearer. Sarah felt her heart jump and her hands began to tremble. The doctor wrote notes quickly and asked for a quiet test and a check of Lena's reflexes. The nurse moved a small light near Lena's eyes and watched carefully. Lena did not wake, but her eyes reacted more than before. The doctor said they had to observe this closely. The staff asked where the dog came from, but no one had an answer. The guard said the dog had entered from the front door and ran straight here. The doctor looked from the dog to Lena and then to Sarah. The doctor said it was unlikely for a random animal to find the exact room without guidance. Sarah felt a cold shiver because she had the same thought in her own mind. The German Shepherd turned his head toward the window, and then back to Lena as if checking the time. He stood up slowly, and pressed his nose gently against the side of Lena's hand. The touch was soft like a promise and careful like respect. Lena's breathing changed again and became a little deeper. Sarah leaned closer and told Lena she was right there and that she was safe. The dog sat back down and stayed beside the bed as if he had done this many times before. The room remained quiet and the staff stopped trying to chase him away. Outside the door more nurses gathered to whisper and watch. The hospital that had felt routine and heavy now felt full of a new kind of attention. Sarah did not know the dog's name and did not know his story. She only knew that something inside her told her this dog had come for Lena and not for food or shelter. The doctor said they would allow the dog to stay for a short time under supervision. Sarah nodded because she could not imagine asking him to leave. The dog's eyes stayed focused and warm and patient. In that moment Sarah felt that Lena was not alone in the deep quiet place anymore. And somewhere behind Lena's closed eyes a small door seemed to tremble, as if it had finally heard the right knock. The morning passed slowly after the strange moment in room 317, and the hospital felt different than before. Nurses spoke in softer voices and doctors checked their watches more often. News of the German Shepherd spread quietly from one hallway to another. People whispered about the calm dog who walked in like he belonged there. Some staff felt nervous while others felt curious and hopeful. The dog remained beside Lena's bed without moving much. He watched her face and listened to her breathing like it mattered more than anything else. Sarah stayed in her chair and did not leave even when a nurse offered her food. Sarah felt tired but alert, as if her heart refused to rest. Every small movement from Lena felt like a miracle waiting to grow. The doctors returned several times to check Lena's condition. They spoke carefully and asked Sarah many questions. They asked if Lena had ever been around a dog like this before. Sarah searched her memory deeply. She remembered Lena loved animals and often stopped to pet dogs in the park. She remembered Lena once crying because a lost dog was taken away by animal workers. But Sarah could not remember a German shepherd that matched this one. The dog had no collar and no tag. Security checked nearby cameras and found nothing helpful. The footage only showed the dog appearing at the entrance and running straight to the third floor. No hesitation and no confusion. The path looked chosen and not guessed. A senior doctor named Paul joined the room later that day. Paul had kind eyes and a steady voice. He watched the dog closely and noticed how calm and trained he seemed. Paul said the dog behaved like a service dog or a rescue dog. Paul said animals like this were often trained to stay focused and gentle. Sarah listened closely and felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. She wondered where the dog had learned this behavior. Paul asked if Sarah was comfortable letting the dog stay a little longer. Sarah agreed without hesitation. Sarah felt the dog was helping in a way medicine could not explain yet. As the hours passed, Lena's breathing stayed deeper than before. The machines showed small but clear changes. Nurses recorded the details and checked again to be sure. Lena's fingers moved again later in the afternoon, and this time her hand lifted just a little under the blanket. Sarah gasped and leaned forward but did not touch too fast. The dog lifted his head and moved closer. He made a low soft sound again and placed his nose near Lena's wrist. Lena's face showed a tiny change like a shadow passing over calm water. Paul watched carefully and asked for another test. The staff remained calm, but inside many of them felt something powerful happening. Later that evening the dog finally stood and walked slowly around the room. He sniffed near the chair and near the window. He looked at Sarah for a long moment. Sarah felt like the dog was trying to speak without words. Sarah whispered thank you without knowing why. The dog returned to Lena's side and lay down carefully. Sarah noticed again the mark on his shoulder. It looked old and healed. Sarah wondered if the dog had faced danger before. The thought made her chest tighten. That night a cleaner named Mira stopped at the door and stared. Mira had worked at the hospital for many years. She looked at the dog and frowned as if searching her memory. Mira said she had seen a similar dog years ago with a little girl near the river park. Mira said the dog stayed close to the girl and followed her everywhere. Mira said the dog once blocked traffic to stop a car when the girl fell near the road. Mira said the dog was brave and smart. Sarah's heart began to race. Sarah asked Mira to tell her everything she remembered. Mira said the girl's name might have been Lena, but she was not fully sure. Mira said the dog never left the girl's side even when people tried to separate them. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. She remembered now. Years ago before the accident, Lena had met a young German shepherd near the river park. The dog had been hurt and scared. Lena had stayed with him and called for help. Animal workers had taken the dog away for care. Lena had cried for days after that. Sarah remembered Lena asking every week if the dog was okay. Sarah had told her the dog was safe. Sarah had never seen the dog again after that day. Tears rolled down Sarah's face as memory connected to the present. Sarah looked at the dog and whispered Lena's old nickname for the dog, which was Max. The dog's ears lifted instantly. He stood and looked at Sarah with sharp focus. He stepped closer and wagged his tail once slowly. Sarah covered her mouth and cried quietly. The connection was real. The doctors listened to Sarah and Mira carefully. Paul said this explained a lot. Paul said strong emotional bonds could affect the mind in deep ways. Paul said the dog might be triggering memories and feelings that Lena's mind still held. Paul said this did not break any rules of science, even if it felt unbelievable. The staff allowed Max to stay overnight under careful watch. Sarah stayed too and rested her head near the bed. During the night, Lena's breathing stayed steady and strong. Her hand moved several times and once her fingers wrapped gently around the edge of the blanket. Max lifted his head every time and stayed close. Sarah whispered stories of the park and the river and the brave dog who saved a scared puppy. Sarah felt hope grow like a small light refusing to go out. In the early morning, Lena's eyes fluttered again and stayed open just a little longer than before. Tears fell from the corners of her eyes without a sound. Max stood and gently licked the air near her hand without touching her face. Sarah held her breath as the impossible slowly moved closer to becoming real. The next day arrived with a quiet energy that filled the hospital halls and made people walk a little slower and listen a little harder. Sunlight reached into room 317 and touched Lena's face with a soft glow. Sarah noticed it first and gently adjusted the curtain so the light would not be too bright. Max lifted his head and watched the movement, as if protecting a fragile moment. Lena's breathing was steady and deeper than it had been in weeks. The machines continued their calm rhythm and the numbers on the screen showed small but hopeful signs. Doctors and nurses came in often and checked everything twice. Their voices stayed calm but their eyes showed surprise and growing belief. Paul stood near the bed and observed without rushing. He knew something important was happening and he did not want to disturb it. Sarah spent the morning talking to Lena about the park and the river and the old days when Lena ran without fear. She spoke about the first time Lena met Max and how Lena laughed even when her shoes were wet. Sarah told Lena that Max had come back just for her. Max listened closely and leaned his head toward Lena every time Sarah said her name. Lena's fingers moved again and this time her hand lifted higher and rested against the blanket. Sarah felt her heart race and her knees weaken. She reached out and held Lena's hand carefully and felt warmth and gentle pressure. Tears ran down Sarah's face as she whispered words of love and strength. Later that afternoon Lena made a small sound from deep in her throat. It was not a word, but it was a sound filled with effort. Everyone in the room froze and then moved closer at the same time. Paul raised his hand to keep things calm. He checked the screen and then checked Lena's eyes. Lena's eyelids opened slowly and stayed open longer than ever before. Her eyes were cloudy at first, but they moved as if searching. Max stood and stepped closer and gently placed his head near Lena's arm. Lena's eyes shifted toward him and stopped. Her gaze settled on Max and stayed there. Her lips moved slightly and a soft breath escaped. Sarah leaned close and whispered that she was there and that Max was there too. Lena's fingers tightened around Sarah's hand and held. The room filled with quiet emotion. Nurses wiped tears from their eyes and the doctor's voice shook slightly as he spoke instructions. Paul said Lena was waking and responding and that this was a strong sign. He said they needed to move slowly and carefully. Max stayed calm and steady and did not bark or jump. He stayed grounded like an anchor. Lena's eyes stayed open and followed Max when he shifted his head. Her breathing grew more natural and her face showed a faint change that looked like recognition. Sarah laughed softly through tears and told Lena she was doing great. Lena made another sound and this time it was closer to a word. Her lips formed a shape and her voice came out weak but real. She whispered Max. Sarah felt the world pause and then rush back all at once. She nodded and told Lena yes and that Max was here and that he had come to see her. Max wagged his tail slowly and leaned closer without touching her face. Lena's eyes filled with tears and one tear rolled down her cheek. Sarah wiped it gently and told Lena she was safe and loved. The doctors allowed a few more minutes before starting gentle checks. Lena stayed awake and squeezed Sarah's hand when asked. She blinked when asked and moved her fingers again. Every small action felt like a victory built from patience and love. As the evening approached, Lena grew tired and her eyes closed again, but this time it was different. It was not the deep silent sleep from before. It was a resting sleep. Paul explained that waking after such a long time took energy and that rest was important. He explained that emotional connection could help the brain find its way back. He said Max had clearly played a role in reaching Lena. Sarah listened and nodded and thanked everyone again and again. Max lay beside the bed and rested his head on the floor. He stayed alert but calm like his job was not finished. That night Sarah dreamed lightly while sitting in the chair. She dreamed of Lena running in the park with Max beside her. She woke often and checked Lena's breathing and smiled every time. Lena moved in her sleep and made quiet sounds. Max lifted his head each time and then rested again. In the early morning Lena opened her eyes once more and looked at Sarah. This time her gaze was clearer. She whispered "Mama" with effort and emotion. Sarah leaned forward and answered right away with a steady voice, even though her heart felt like it would burst. Max stood and wagged his tail again, and the room felt full of hope. The doctors came in and confirmed that Lena was responding more each hour. They said recovery would take time and care, but the hardest wall had cracked. Paul told Sarah that love and memory were powerful tools. Sarah looked at Max and smiled through tears. She knew the journey was not over, but she also knew the impossible had already happened. In that quiet room with soft light and gentle breaths, a girl had found her way back, guided by a loyal heart that never forgot her. The days that followed felt gentle and careful, like the world had slowed down to protect something precious. Lena woke more often now and stayed awake longer each time. Her eyes followed people and light and movement with growing clarity. Sarah stayed close and spoke softly and patiently. She never rushed Lena and never forced words. Max remained beside the bed like a quiet promise. He moved only when needed and rested when Lena rested. The hospital staff adjusted their routine around the room because everyone sensed that something rare was unfolding. Doctors checked Lena daily and smiled more freely now. They explained that Lena's mind was reconnecting step by step and that emotional safety mattered as much as medicine. Sarah listened closely and followed every instruction with care and hope. Lena began to recognize voices and respond with small nods and blinks. She squeezed Sarah's hand when she understood and relaxed when she felt tired. Max became her anchor during every waking moment. When Lena felt confused, Max stayed still and close. When Lena felt stronger, Max lifted his head and watched her proudly. Nurses noticed that Lena's breathing stayed calm whenever Max was near. They noticed her heart rhythm stayed steady and relaxed. Paul explained that familiarity and trust helped the brain heal. He said Max represented a memory filled with safety and courage. Sarah looked at Max and saw not just a dog but a bridge back to life. One afternoon Lena managed her first full word without strain. She whispered water with effort and patience. Sarah cried softly and brought a small sip just as the nurse allowed. Lena drank slowly and rested again. Max watched closely and then rested his head near the bed rail. Sarah felt gratitude fill her chest like warmth spreading through cold hands. She thanked Max again and again in her heart. She believed he understood because his eyes stayed gentle and focused. As Lena gained strength, her memories returned in fragments. She pointed toward the window and made small sounds. Sarah asked simple questions and waited for signs. Lena nodded when asked about the park. She smiled faintly when Sarah spoke about the river. When Sarah asked about Max, Lena's fingers curled slightly and her lips lifted just enough to show joy. Max wagged his tail slowly and stayed close. These moments built a new rhythm for the room. Hope replaced fear and patience replaced doubt. The hospital board met quietly to discuss Max's presence. Rules existed for reasons, but exceptions sometimes followed miracles. Paul spoke for Max and explained the progress clearly and honestly. He said removing Max could cause emotional stress. The board agreed to allow Max to stay under supervision until Lena could move to a recovery ward. Sarah felt relief wash over her and thanked everyone deeply. Max remained calm, as if he knew the decision had already been made long before words were spoken. Weeks passed and Lena began simple therapy with gentle movements and sounds. She practiced lifting her hands and turning her head. Each success felt like a sunrise after a long night. Max attended every session quietly. When Lena struggled, Max stayed close. When Lena succeeded, Max wagged his tail slowly. The therapists noticed that Lena tried harder when Max was present. They said encouragement did not always need words. Sarah watched and believed more than ever. One morning Lena sat up with support for the first time. Her eyes were bright and aware. She looked at Sarah and then at Max and smiled clearly. The smile was small but full of meaning. Sarah covered her mouth and cried openly this time. Max stepped closer and rested his head gently against Lena's side. Lena lifted her hand slowly and touched Max's fur. Her fingers moved with care and certainty. She whispered friend, and Max stayed still like a statue made of trust. Soon Lena was moved to a brighter room with a window facing the garden. Flowers bloomed outside and birds visited the sill. Lena spent time sitting and watching the world return. Max lay nearby and watched too. Sarah told Lena stories about the future and the simple joys waiting ahead. Lena listened and responded with soft sounds and nods. Her strength returned day by day. The doctors spoke with confidence now and shared plans for continued care at home. The day came when Lena took her first steps with help. Her legs shook but her will stayed strong. Sarah supported one side and a therapist supported the other. Max stood just ahead and waited. Lena took a step toward him and then another. Each step felt like a promise kept. When Lena reached Max, she wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her head against him. Max stayed perfectly still and calm. The room filled with quiet joy and pride. Soon it was time to leave the hospital. Papers were signed and smiles were shared. The staff gathered to say goodbye. Many wiped tears and wished Lena well. Paul knelt and spoke softly to Lena and told her she had done something powerful. Lena nodded and smiled. Sarah thanked everyone from her heart. Max walked beside them calmly as they moved toward the exit. The same doors that once opened to mystery now opened to hope. Outside the air felt fresh and warm. Lena took a deep breath and smiled at the sky. Sarah held her close and felt the weight of fear finally lift. Max stood beside them with steady eyes and a gentle wag. They walked together toward a new chapter built on patience, courage, and loyalty. What began as an impossible moment became a living truth. A bond remembered brought a soul back home.